Guys, thanks so much for joining me in this conversation. We're starting our series, This is War. So we're going to be talking about kind of the general questions that we might have surrounding spiritual warfare. So I just want to start with that first question. How would you describe spiritual warfare? Just in general, simple terms.
Yeah, great question. I mean, warfare gives this idea of enemy, friend, and foe, all those kind of things. So in a spiritual sense, there is a war always happening around us. So sometimes we think of the war being within us.
Right.
Sometimes it's outside of us. But from a spiritual standpoint, just like if you look at a human standpoint, nation against nation, spiritual standpoint, there's a real war.
Yeah.
The war starts with the war between God and Satan. That's where the origination of that war. But we've been brought into that war, and God is redeeming us and rescuing us in the middle of the war. But we're in that kind of war. So the war is over where we're going, our eternity, over our present, our day, our actions, our choices. So there's a war, and I think about myself, like there's a war within me, there's a war outside of me, there's all these things happening around me. So from a spiritual standpoint, there's enemies, friend, and foe.
Yeah.
And God wants to be friend. If we won't be his enemy, he'll be our friend and he'll fight for us. So there's that spiritual war that's happening.
Yeah, that's so great. Crystal.
I think a lot about just, that God has such a purpose for us when he designs us, and that the war is really just about getting our focus off of that purpose and who God is in our lives. And it starts, from the beginning of our first breath until we take our last, that we're in a war for our destiny, who God created us to be, and seeing him for who he truly is.
Man, that's so good. I love that. I think that as I was thinking about it, there really is this biblical balance when it comes to spiritual warfare. Sometimes we overemphasize it, sometimes we underemphasize it, but just being aware of the war is a big deal. So you kind of touched on the enemies that we battle. Could y'all talk a little bit more about what those enemies are and how they kind of play out in our lives?
Yes. I mean, there's classically they define it as like sin, Satan, and the world. So you define it as like those three camps are our main enemies that we're fighting against. So sin itself as an enemy is sort of like is entangled with who I am from a nature perspective. It's all around me. I see it in others. I see it in myself. Satan, he's the enemy of God, the accuser, the father of lies. He's all around us. So he's working, and there's a demonic world around us. We see that in the life of Jesus as he's casting out demons. You see warfare kind of creeping up in Jesus' ministry where demons trying to step against him and he has power over them. And then the world. I mean, the world is broken. We know it's broken. And so there's all those different components to our environment. And so those are some of the enemies that come against us.
Yeah. You have anything to add, Crystal?
I mean, I think in the term of like enemies, you kind of want to go to like what we see sketched out or like these like scary, like, creature type things. And really when it boils down to it, it can be so simple sometimes. It can be just how much we worry and how much we get distracted by what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to live our lives. And, we kind of want to make it a big thing. And sometimes it's just the real everyday rub of living a life and recognizing what is coming against you to live out who you are.
Yeah, that's so helpful. So when we talk about this warfare, why is it so important that we're aware of it and that we resist it and we fight back?
Well, there's a lot at stake. I mean, there's a lot at stake every single day and then for all seasons of our life. And ultimately our destinies, you mentioned the word destiny, which I think is a good word. I mean, God has a destiny for us, but if we lose in the war, we'll miss our destiny. So I have this quote near my desk at home that says, the man who walks with God always reaches his destiny. Like, I know that. If I walk with God, I will always reach my destiny. But the problem is, if I lose in the war, if I give into the war, if I give into temptation, if I let not God direct my steps, but my flesh or Satan direct my steps, then I end up blowing up my marriage, blowing up my career, blowing up hopes and dreams that God had for me or that I had for myself in terms of my relationship with God. So I think in my own life, there's just so much at stake.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't make me feel paralyzed. It makes me feel, as the Bible says, be alert, to be sober-minded, to be like aware of the reality of what's at stake, because there's a ton at stake.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's so true. You said sober-minded, and I think that culturally we are not very sober-minded. We have a lot of things that just kind of numb us out and make us not aware of what we're thinking and feeling. And so culturally we have to be so mindful to
Yep.
truly be sober-minded and to truly filter what we're thinking and feeling through the lens of who Jesus says we are, where he's calling us to go, and what to do. And I think that we can just get so caught in our own thinking and feeling that we don't even recognize that
Yes.
some of that is not even our own thinking and feeling.
Right.
And I think that idea of being sober-minded brings me back to the reality when you think about being sober versus being drunk in a physical sense. The same thing, you become unaware or dulled, your senses, you're just not ready for what's coming. So if I'm not sober-minded, it might mean that I'm looking at things wrongly. I'm misinterpreting what my enemy, what friend and foe is. Or I might just be dulled. My senses are dulled to what's happening around me. And if there's a war going on around me and I'm not sober-minded, the chances of me being victorious in the middle of that are just very low.
Yeah. And I think, you kind of talked about the mind and those thoughts and those voices that sometimes we hear, and the battle often does start in our mind.
Yes.
And so what would you say to that? If someone's struggling in this war and it really is starting in the mind, what would be your advice for them?
So a lot of times I think about thoughts and feelings and try to ask myself, what is the tone?
Yeah.
How is this sounding? And I know by who the character of God is that he doesn't talk to me like this.
Yeah.
And so it's either my own thinking and feeling that hasn't been submitted to the mind of Christ, or it is the enemy trying to torment me with other thinking, outside of my own.
Yeah.
And so you really just have to filter it with, what does this sound like? Does this sound like how God would actually approach me and talk to me?
That's so good. Pastor Brad, do you have any final thoughts about that, about spiritual warfare, anything like that to wrap this up?
I mean, I think it's interesting the point that Crystal just made about like Jesus said, "My sheep, my people will know my voice." You know, so I think it is a really important topic to begin to think like, even when I'm tempted, maybe before I even recognize this temptation, to think like, first of all, am I believing lies? Am I leaning into lies, or am I leaning in the voice of God? And so as his people, we're supposed to learn his voice, and that helps us to know, should I go left or right?
Right.
Should I move forward or should I step back in every situation? And so there's a lot at stake in some of those decisions every day.
Yeah.
Every day I wake up, every day at work, every day with my kids, every day, whatever decisions are in front of me, that it's important. So the Bible will talk about like walking by the Spirit or walking by the flesh. I will walk by one or the other. One is my friend and is for me, and the other is against me. Scriptures say he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I don't want to be stolen, killed, or destroyed.
Right.
And so there's a lot there. And so I got to say, Lord, what is your voice? I got to spend time in his voice, the word. I'm going to spend time in prayer to hear his voice. I've got to do that. And that takes time. So in the meantime, I'm going to ask for godly counsel, because maybe they hear his voice in another way that will help me in the war that I'm in the middle of. And I've just got to pray, God, protect me, be with me, help me in every decision every day.
Yeah, I think that's so practical and so helpful. Do you have any final thoughts, Crystal?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of that a little bit, the staying connected to the presence of God.
Yes.
It's literally the only way that we have his mind and his thinking about things, and are able to truly be sober-minded.
Yeah.
And just the practicality of really spending time with him and just bringing all of your things. And even if you think it's your own thinking, or if it's an enemy type thing coming against you, you can just bring it to his feet, talk to him about it, and then 100% of the time you feel better when you get up. You might not have answers or know why, but you feel like you have strength and energy to continue on and to think about it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's all so helpful. Thank you all so much. It's so encouraging to know we have someone who's for us. He's fighting this battle for us. So as we face the war, we can trust him and continue to go to him, be in his presence. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yes.